Um, I'm Haley, one of the SAANZ student reps, and welcome to the session of our Sociology Pathways seminar series. So these seminars are aiming to promote the different opportunities and possibilities out there for sociology graduates. So we really hope that you get something from this talk. And today we're lucky enough to be joined by Casimir MacGregor. Casimir is a senior scientist and program leader of the Transition to a Zero Carbon Built Environment research program at SAANZ. His research explores how people interact with science, technology, and society. Through this, Casimir helps enable innovation and systems change within the construction sector to address climate change. And he's also committed to applying social science methods and insights within a transdisciplinary environment. This has led him to collaborate with scientists, clinicians, activists, lawyers, engineers, architects, and designers. And today, Casimir will be speaking on the dialogue between disciplines to confront contemporary public health challenges and pursue innovations in the practice of social science. He'll be outlining the value of sociology to addressing some of the most pressing issues we face today. So Casimir is going to be speaking for around half an hour, and then we'll move to our Q&A session. Once we move into the Q&A session, feel free to raise your hand or put your messages on the chat or privately message them to Eva or myself. And the session is being recorded. And so if you don't want to be seen or anything, just turn your cameras off. Otherwise, it'd be nice to see your faces. And that's just to make it more accessible to people later on. We'll put it on the website. So yeah, that's all the basics covered. So now I'll just let Casimir take it away.
Cheers, thank you, Haley. Well, thank you very much, guys, for coming, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to share my journey, and hopefully you might learn something along the way, or give you inspiration, or think, yeah, I don't really want to do that, I'll do something else. But I think I'll just talk a bit about my journey, kind of where I've come from, and then I'll talk a bit about some of the more current things that I'm doing, and then talk a bit about skills, and then where we see a bit of the future and advice, things like that, because I think they're highly, highly important. So if you guys kind of might know me, obviously my background has mainly been in social science. Obviously I've done a little bit of sociology, but most of my degrees have been in social anthropology. So and obviously public health as well, I had public health training. So I guess I got to the end of my sociology degree and thought, well, social science degree, I thought, what can I do with that? And I looked around, this was in the early 2000s, and bugger all. That was the answer. Didn't know what to do. So that's why I went to medical school at the University of Otago and studied public health, because I thought, oh, I could apply my social science to public health. And that was really interesting. It was a really stimulating environment, because obviously my classes, we had clinicians, we had epidemiologists, we had social workers, we had health policy people, we had a very eclectic background. And I kind of really found that really interesting. But what really frustrated me about this was everyone in the public health and came from a particular point of view, a particular view of understanding the world. And at the time, I'd only had my bachelor's, so I really kind of struggled with adding value to how I could view public health and how I could make a contribution. So based upon that kind of, I guess, haphazard or lack of ability to, I guess, have a toolbox, I kind of went back and studied social science again at the more postgraduate level. And that for me, I guess, gave me, the start of my journey, helped think about the things that I wanted to view or how I viewed the world. And that for me was a really important conceptual toolbox in order to think about methods, how I approach things, but also theory and others about how I can really think about things. So for me, that was kind of really important. So for me, I've already been driven, I guess, by just doing sociology and doing social science. So for me, it's always about the practice, and I've always been really driven to do those things. So I guess one of the challenge that I've had is really kind of pushing myself in my social science. I've always wanted to learn from good people and know things. So that led me, after my master's at the University of Otago, to do my PhD in Australia at Macquarie Uni. I went to different kind of universities around the world, in America, the UK and others, but I kind of chose Macquarie for a number of reasons, mainly because it was a very engaging environment at the time. Macquarie Uni had a lot of people like John Locto, who studied with Julia Caritza, and we had a lot of Derrida, Foucault scholars, very post-structuralist and critical theory. So I was very much engaged in that kind of mindset. So I really wanted to deal with people who knew stuff, and also kind of noticed that a lot of the key professors around had studied at Macquarie Uni. So I know they had a very strong tradition of dealing with social science. So I went there and had a wonderful experience. Macquarie is one of the few universities that really looks after their students and gives them wonderful money to do their research and great support. So it was a pretty formidable academic environment back at the time. And I think even now it's definitely one of the leading departments in Australia that give me a lot of good skills. But from that experience, what I really wanted to do, I guess, is really push myself with I guess, my engagement with the world and my engagement with social science. So initially my career really focused on teaching. So even way back at the University of Otago and that, I've taught since I was an honours student. So I was very, very interested in trying to teach. And that's been quite important. But for me, it's always also been about research, you know, trying to understand people's experiences, engagement with the world has been something that's really driven me. And I've always thought or sought to do that in very kind of innovative ways. So one of my first jobs I kind of had after teaching various universities in Australia, mainly University of Sydney, taught for a while, was a research, kind of assistant research fellow job at the School of Public Health at the University of New South Wales. So a lot of that kind of work focused on mainly stuff around vulnerability and AIDS, but also pandemic influenza. So I was kind of tasked with trying to do research on kind of, I guess, kind of frame around ontological security and people's experiences of pandemics and what we can do to assist that. At the time, it was really interesting because no one really wanted to be interested. No one cared about pandemics at that time. So it was a very difficult, challenging project. But we did some excellent interviews with people with cystic fibrosis that got me dealing a lot with kind of patient activists and patients to hear about their lived experience. So that for me was really interesting. And obviously the policy making process around preparing for pandemics was quite interesting. So based on that experience, I was very interested in, I guess, in learning a bit more about how we understand health and how we kind of engage with health. So through various circumstances, I was offered a position to work at Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney in a clinical research team. So this is with a professor mainly of nursing, emergency nursing, where I worked with some professors from the University of Western Australia and the hospital in their research and clinical practice team to really drill down and support the development of research at the hospital and that local area health board, and just around the issues of emergency medicine. So my person who I worked with at the time, Marg Fry, was a very well-known emergency clinician. Most people would know her in emergency medicine. She's a bit of a name, but she pioneered the use of ethnography in emergency departments. So she's, you know, a nice innovator. So part of that experience, I guess, was learning from people who have done things, and she really was a fantastic mentor with me and really helped me understand how social science can exist in a very technical context like that. So I guess what my research kind of did at the time was really focused on advanced practice care. So I was using qualitative methods, like observations, interviews and stuff to kind of learn, I guess, about the practice of advanced nursing and emergency clinicians, about how they manage hospitals, especially around pain relief, things like that. So we did a number of studies around that that were really quite useful. So one of the key contributions of my work there is we trialed a thing called a PainAD tool, which is kind of a tool to assess cognitive impairment. And this was like a special, more ED tool. So the gold standard, you guys probably don't want the detail, is the kind of mini mental tool. And this is kind of very long, complicated 20-odd question things. And with the ED context, that's obviously not very effective. So what we did is we did some clinical trials around this tool called the PainAD, which basically is a kind of a brief version of that. There's maybe around 3-odd questions that help recall. So that was one of my introduction into doing research that could kind of make a difference. So based upon our research, that tool was then adopted across a number of New South Wales emergency departments. And now it's part of standard practice because of our research that showed it was very effective and a good use to do so. So that was a bit of my introduction into how social science could be useful and understanding. So based upon that as well, I got offered a job at Monash University in Melbourne to work with Alan Peterson. So for me, this was a great experience because for me, Alan Peterson, I don't know if you guys have read Alan's work, but he's a phenomenal sociologist and probably one of the top medical sociologists in the world. I read him as an undergraduate. I was always in awe of his books. He, at the time, wrote a lot about the new public health movement with Deborah Lupton. And also he did a lot of stuff around kind of new genetics, I guess we called it at the time. Now today we'd call it, biomedical technologies and stuff. But he did a lot of stuff around the biotechnology space. And I was lucky enough, I guess I didn't, one thing I'll talk about later is skills is networking. So while I did my PhD, I often went and met a lot of people, a lot of famous academics that I found really interesting or books that I read, and I just want to go and have coffee and lunch with them. So here's a great tip. If there's someone you're interested in, ring them up and say, hey, do you want to go and have lunch? And often that works, quite often. So I was lucky enough and fortunate to meet people like Catherine Mills, a lot of other kind of well-known people in the area. I met Alan once at his house in Brighton for lunch, and we talked about kind of our journeys, and I asked him, what he thought about things. And I was lucky enough that Alan also agreed to be an examiner for my PhD thesis, so it was quite fortunate. So I ended up in my job at Monash basically as a lecturer in sociology. And from that, I started work on stem cell tourism. So I guess that's a lot of my work I've done. So my PhD was actually on stem cell research, especially around the debate in Australia around that. So I looked at kind of biomedical imaginaries of stem cell science. So I did some ethnography in a burns unit at Concord Hospital, looking at regenerative medicine. So I worked with clinicians, or observed clinicians doing regenerative medicine practice around burns. So what they do is they grow skin in the lab, and I look at the processes around that, which is quite interesting. For my PhD, also spent some time with activists, patient activists, and policymakers as well. I spent a bit of time down in Canberra talking about the policymaking process, and also tried to spend some time with journalists as well, because journalists, I think, are really important. It's quite interesting when you put yourself out there. Some journalists were very forthcoming, like some of the journalists from the Sydney Morning Herald, and were very fortunate, but others from the Australian and other newspapers were very rude. So your political affiliation aligns quite well with newspapers, I find sometimes. So I guess one thing that's driven me through this is kind of action, engaging with others who are trying to do change in the world. So for me, I was very taken with these activists that were trying to do things. So after I was doing the stem cell tourism work, we became very, I guess, involved in the debate in Australia. I was quite fortunate that the team was very mixed disciplinary. So we had people like Megan Munsey, who's a well-known stem cell scientist and educator. And we had other scientists as well, Claire Tanner as well, and Jane Brophy, who worked on it. So that for me was a great experience because we all had kind of different backgrounds that we brought to it, but we all kind of sought to make change. And how we sought to make change was, I'd call it kind of agenda setting. So what we sought to do is kind of share the experiences of our research and bring it to the attention of policymakers. So what we often did is we had like a policy workshop where we got like the Therapeutic Goods Administration and the Australian Doctors Board together in a room to talk about the issues to see what we could do about it. A lot of, for this research I did at Monash, also did some research in Germany where I interviewed federal government officials and local government officials and EU officials around the governance of I guess, clinical medicine and all these kind of things. So what we're trying to do, I guess, is think about what were the technicalities and how can we use this within the Australian context. So a lot of this research has really been around trying to make that change and bring people together. And so where I am today, I guess, is kind of following on that mantra. I know I've told many of you before, but I was once, at Monash, and obviously I was a lecturer doing that, and I wrote the best article I've ever probably written in my life. It was a wonderful article. You can go and read it if you want. It's called Promoting a Healthier You. It's a fantastic article. It's well written, it's well researched, and it got bugger all citations. I think from memory, it might have had 3. I don't know how many it's got now. Hopefully it's got more. But I was very demoralized by that. I thought, it's got to be more to life than just that. So what I sought to do, I guess, I just wanted a career change. I wanted to use my skills to do, I guess, better, try and make change in the world. So an opportunity at Brands kind of came up. So I was the first basic social scientist at Brands. So Brands had never had social science before. So those of you who don't know Brands, it's a independent research institute in Wellington that's funded by the Building Research Levy. So basically, taxpayers fund us to do research on their behalf so we can create good buildings. So my challenge at Brands has been mainly around instituting social science in this context, making sure, allowing us to work with other teams and involve physicists, designers, architects, material scientists, environmental scientists. But into this, I guess just a year or two once I started, we got very interested in zero carbon. So Brands has a long history of doing zero carbon research, but we didn't really know what to do with it. So one of our solutions was to create a research program. So that so what we're trying to do is create a body of research and try and, I guess, advocate more to create change in the construction industry around zero carbon. So through our efforts, we've basically created a program. So we have about 13 people in our research team now. I currently have an operating budget around $8.5 million per year. And the key part of my job, I guess, is to create research impact. So how I've created impact so far is mainly to assist government stakeholders. So I've been doing a lot of research that created the MB Building for Climate Change regulatory changes. I've also assisted with the Ministry of Education in the creation of the Environmental Action Plan. So, and there's a whole lot of other things that I've done. So the key thing for this is we've kind of sought to provide the evidence or knowledge to assist the policymakers in enabling change. So for me, this is what research impact's about, right? It's about trying to make change and trying to make the world a better place and using your skills to do so. So for me, some of the key skills or key sociological skills I use every day are probably the ones you're very familiar with, critical thinking and kind of your sociology reading. So for me, I often take a very systems perspective or think about how the systems or how the socio-technical approach can be used to understand complex phenomena. I do that quite often. Writing for me is also key. I'm write every day. So we write lots of things it could be popular magazine audiences, it's academic articles, it's reports for government, it's lots of things. The other key one is public speaking. I do lots of presentations to government, to industry, to public. We do webinars, we do all that kind of stuff. So that's a real common thing. But I guess the number one key thing that I have to do, and which draws heavily on sociology, is just engaging with people, talking with people, hearing about what they got to say, get things, hearing, listening, sharing ideas, helping each other to try to do things. So 2 of the biggest skills I would advocate that we have in sociology that I've used to others out there is one is ideas bridging. So we take different ideas from other places, but kind of corral that into an original insight or something. So we might take ideas from, philosophy and other ideas, and we might present them as a coherent whole to someone. So that's really important. Another one is, I call it network bridging. So what I'm doing also in the connector, so I'll take people maybe from university and a government context and put them in contact with others. So being the connector, meeting people, knowing what's happening in the system is really core skill that we kind of have and should play. So those are 2 of the key ones for me. And I think I can't really stress enough really that engagement aspect, really listening to people and engaging with them is fundamentally, I think, the key to success for a lot of this kind of work if you're doing other things with people in industry and other contexts, because this real human element, I think, is really, really kind of central to how we do things. I think, as sociologists often take it for granted that anyone can do this, but I'm here to assure you that that's not the case. So part of the challenge for us going forward is to think about acknowledging the skills that we have and kind of owning them and saying, hey, look, these are really useful skills and we should, use them, be upfront about them and kind of share with them. So what I've often find, especially in government context, is things, we often understand things like socio-technical theory, we understand the genealogy of the idea and we have the fancy language to call it. But often people in government don't have that fancy language, but they know what this thing is. They know that they should do this, but they don't really know how, and they often can't make that connection. So often one of the key skills I think we often need to have, I call it Sociology 101. Often you're the translator, you're giving people the language and ability to think about things differently. You're kind of giving them an ability to put a name on it, to provide some guidance that might assist them to develop their ideas further. And I think that's kind of really important. Just more generally, I think it's understanding the context of our time. So often people don't realise they need social science expertise. I think if we put it in very jargonistic terms, it doesn't gel well with them. But what you can often do is just rephrase things like, oh, you need to engage, understand end users, for example. That's a terminology people use, or you're trying to understand other people's point of view. So if you use kind of words like that, it kind of makes it more accessible. We know that we're doing sociology, but it doesn't necessarily mean that other people need to know. So you just kind of using ways to open up your skill set in a way that makes it more approachable and understandable to others. Because what I've often found, and I'm sure many others will back me up, is as soon as you kind of make your skills available, you show people how to do things, people are very interested in how to do that. And I've kind of found that recently with a lot of the behaviour change work that I've done. So going back to that public health training, I did a lot on health promotion and behaviour change. So as a lecturer in public health, I used to teach a lot of that when I was at the University of New South Wales. But what I've found more recently is people are really interested in how to influence people and how to think about that. And people often tell you about might read about it, the stuff on nudging and behavioral insights and all that. But what a lot of these key theories kind of miss is that more contextual based understanding and systems theory that sociology brings. So sociology has a lot to really bring in that kind of wider context of understanding how the parts of the system fit together and how the individual relates to different parts of that. And it's really good to bring in actors, human actors, but the other key thing then is the non-human actors. So most of us would know things like that as, new materialist or obviously an actor network kind of approach to things. But what you're doing is you're talking about how things like regulation, could be discourses, might impact particular behaviours and ways of doing things, but we're just not really given it kind of the language of what we do around that. So I think for me, that's kind of a critical thing. So just, I guess in the final few minutes, while I talk a bit about the advice, because I think there's quite a bit we can kind of think about. I think these are just some things that have helped me that might help you. So one for me is just understanding your purpose. Think about why you like sociology. What do you want to do? Do you want to make change in the world? Do you just want to read books? I don't know. Think about your why and kind of help frame that, help that direct you to where you want to go. So for me, my why was always kind of challenge myself and challenge my ability to do, challenge my sociological practice. That's why I was driven to like hospitals and other places to really, engage with that. Another one is kind of ask people for advice, anyone. If there's someone you look up to, I've done this many times at a conference. Often the most important people are not around the food, they're in the corners, away from things, strike up conversations and just ask, hey, especially older people, hey, you got any advice for any young people going forward? I've done that many times. I had some real good ones. One of the good ones was obviously avoid boring people. I don't know if you guys have read the biography of, can't remember what, Watson, James Watson, who discovered the DNA. So he's got a biography that says avoid boring people, and he's so correct on that. So find people that interest and engage you and talk to them. Ask people for advice, people you look up to, and they'll give you honest advice. That's a good thing about asking old people. They'll give it to you honestly. Because they got nothing to lose. Often if the people are high prestige and that, they'll talk honestly what you need to do. Another one is find a mentor who inspires you. I talked earlier about Alan Peterson. So for me, there's always someone who inspired me. And to this day, he's always been a constant mentor and presence in my life. Even today, I ring him up and ask him for advice on how to do things, if I've got problems, if I'm struggling with how to write things, or career advice. I'm going to ring him up, talk to him. That's what happened. You need someone in your life that can really give you, that support and knowledge, because I think that's really, really important. And another one is kind of practice compassion for yourself and others. So what I mean by that is often sociology sometimes is often the butt of jokes, but I think, we need to move past this kind of negativity sometimes that people have of sociology. A lot of our approaches are very relevant and needed. So I think it's owning your skills, that they are valid skills, and just, using that to your advantage. So, and that's the other thing. And just, I guess the other one, confidence, following a sociology career is possible. We've all, it is possible. You just got to, I guess, have that ability, I guess, to try it out and see how it goes. As I said before, you might need to change some language. There might not be that sociology language, but it could be the skills of sociology. It could be the practice. So just come with an open mind and really think about, how can I use the skills, or how can I follow my passion or purpose to fulfill my goals? Because once you've done that, that will really kind of help you think about what you're doing. So don't be too bounded by labels. I think that's quite a key thing. And just one of the other one is try not to be too bounded by disciplines. I know that sounds a funny thing to say, but we can learn a lot from other disciplines. So a good example I always use is things around learning systematic reviews. So a lot in public health, for example, we get taught how to undertake systematic reviews. So a systematic review is like a fancy kind of literature review. So just because it's not in the sociology school set doesn't mean we shouldn't kind of have an understanding. So I'd kind of challenge us to think more about, are there things in other disciplines that we could take that's useful, that will add to my skill set, that will add value? So I've always found that quite useful, because if you're dealing with commercial clients, for example, sometimes they're not too interested in a lit review. But if you say, hey, I'm going to do a systematic review and I'm going to have a criteria to assess this, and we're going to have a group that's going to rank them by use of the tool, that gives people the more certainty about how to undertake things. So I guess for me, it's just being open to new things. And I guess that's that openness, as I mentioned earlier, has allowed me to, work in hospitals. It's allowed me to work in medical schools. It's allowed me to do other things. So it's just being open to these things. There's another experience that I had when I was working early in my career. I was approached by some scientists who worked at the Melbourne Eye Hospital. They're all scientists. Some of them were clinician scientists, and what they were really interested in were the ethics of human gene editing technology. So this was way back before most people even knew what gene editing was, that Cas9 stuff, that CRISPR stuff. So what was interesting about that is these scientists sought me out as a social scientist that could assist them to I guess, look at these ethical issues, because a lot of what they're doing at the time was collecting samples from patients, and they were obviously using this gene editing technology on them. But what brought them to me, I guess, was trying to understand that human experience and the ethical challenges of what would happen with this technology. Because they heard from people that obviously I was open to kind of learning and engaging with others who weren't, sociologists. I wanted to work with other people that they were very open to kind of working with me. And I think some of those studies, I think, have gone on to be quite prominent articles. I know some of the stuff I've done has been quite highly cited and been used in a number of government publications in the UK and New Zealand as well when they're doing the gene editing things. Because when I arrived in New Zealand, I got asked by MPI to engage with a lot of these stuff around that. So I think it's just been open to new opportunities, seeing where it goes. You never know where it's going to go, and I think that's probably a message that kind of covers it all. Just give it a try. If you fail, you don't know where it's going to go, do you? So that's what I've got to say. So very happy to answer any questions if you're interested.
Yeah, thanks for that talk, Casimir. It was like really enjoyed how, you know, it canvassed a lot of your career thus far and like all the different spaces that you've been in. So yeah, just we will open up to Q&A now. So if you've got any questions or comments for Casimir, now's your opportunity to ask. So you can stick your hand up or raise your hand or put some messages in the chat. If you want to be anonymous when asking, then you can message them to Eva or myself. Yeah, so I'll open that up to anyone. I do have a question if no one else wants to jump in. I was wondering personally, because you talked about how you started out in social anthropology, and then you also touched on the end a bit more about being open to different disciplines and stuff. But yeah, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more on the like moving between disciplines and like the values of that, I guess, especially when you're still working as a student, like either in undergrad or like postgrad.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess, I don't know, for those of you who know anthropology is very focused on, I guess, world making and understanding people's point of view through participant observation. So what I guess made me frustrated about anthropology is I'm more interested in using methods that suit the requirements of the research question. And anthropology doesn't really do that. It's ethnography or nothing, essentially. So it's a very political kind of thing. So what I was drawn to, I guess, in sociology is the freedom to try different methods. So I was very interested in my research, doing stuff on media studies and other kind of things, interviews, discourse analysis of policy documents. I was very open to different methods. So for me, the distinction between anthropology and sociology is anthropology is about world making, understand human experience. But for me, sociology is about people's relationship, mainly to institutions and relationship of power to other things. So I'm very much interested in the intersection of power and people's actions. So for me, the orientation of sociology makes more sense. And that's where my work kind of is focused about. It's focused about the interaction of people and power in that space in between. So for me, I guess it's that orientational view of the world I was quite taken with. And obviously the notion of methodology, to having that freedom to try different methods, I think is a real strength. Because for me, sociology is, I guess it's a very broad church where anthropologists are almost all the same. We often have a joke that every anthropologist is just a frustrated novelist. So for me, because sociology is a very diverse discipline. I mentioned before that I studied public health, so I studied medical sociology with Peter Davis back in the day. And Peter Davis, most of you would know, was a very quant sociologist. So, sociology is a very broad church, and that's what I think is its strength. It allows people to do different things in different ways. So that allows us to I guess, be more reactive to the world around us than what anthropology can be. We could almost open that one up for debate, I think, in the room. Do people agree with that view of sociology?
I mean, I asked the question. I guess I am coming from the perspective that I started out in history and philosophy, and to me, sociology is a discipline that allows you to kind of push the boundaries of what is allowed in other disciplines. So I find sometimes that history, at least at my university, can be quite restrictive in what you're allowed to do. And philosophy was taught in quite the analytic style, rather than like the bigger debates, like you had to kind of narrow down on one thing, whereas sociology kind of lets you use those kind of more marginalized methods and stuff. But I always draw on history and philosophy and stuff when I do my research, so I kind of hear what you're saying about drawing on other disciplines.
I guess I'll just extend a bit on this. Is just around, I guess, when you're in your professional career, I wouldn't change areas. This is great advice I learned myself. So as I said before, most of my career I've been a very medical sociologist. You know, it's worked hospitals, done gene editing, so many other things. But when I came to brands, I was very interested in healthy housing. I was very interested in doing the health angle, but it became kind of a bit difficult to do. So I was kind of more thrust or more interested in the climate change stuff. I thought it can't be that too difficult. I'll just lean on my science technology skills and do it. But I think in some ways I've probably overestimated the ability it takes to change disciplines like that. I think it has been a challenge the last 5 years, because where I was at, you know, when I was doing, you know, stem cell stuff, you know, I'd done stem cells for maybe about 10 years, knew the discipline inside out, I knew what the issues were, I knew what all the context was. I had a large international network of colleagues that I could draw upon. So when I came to brands, I basically had to start again, and that was really difficult. You know, we had to start building a social science team from nothing, had to build connections internationally and nationally. So it's taken me 5 years essentially just to get up to speed on the subtleties of the discipline and make a contribution, because that's the thing. It's just not learning, understanding things. It's how can you make a contribution to the existing debates. So I think, so I've told this to Oren a few times, when you're thinking about your career and your career trajectory, try and keep it kind of focused on what you're trying to do. I think if you try to do too many things, it can get quite fragmented. And when you're going for things like grants and that, it makes it really difficult. So if you're going for a Marsden Fast Start, for example, or a DECRA in Australia, you need publications and things that are very aligned with your research narrative. So what I mean by research narrative, it's kind of like a story about your career that you can tell people that, you know, demonstrates what your research is, and it's backed up by publications and other things. That's what you kind of tell people. It's your stump speech. So just be mindful of these things, that it can impact your career. You know, so you got to have a very coherent, I guess, message and way of presenting yourself and your professional outputs and abilities, because I think that's really important. And you know, it's something I probably most of you who know me will know sometimes I get a bit pig-headed on certain things. Determined is probably a better word, wouldn't it be, Oren? Determined. And so I think it's really, you know, I just think, oh, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. And I like doing things. I'm just a doer. That's what I do, right? I just do things. I don't care if no one's done it before. I'm just going to go and freaking do it. I just do it till it's done, right? That's what I do. And same with the building climate change regulations. I don't care. I don't give a shit. No one had done it. We just went and did it. So it's just doing it. Doing is what we do. So yeah, I just be mindful. Have more of a strategy, I think, about your career and how you think about that, because that's something I didn't really, you know, I've always been passionate about medical stuff, and I always will be. It's what I like. But for me, the challenge of doing something with climate change was overriding that. I just felt like I had to do something, because I didn't want to sit around and not contribute to this in any way, because for me it just felt so urgent that I needed to do something. So I guess it came from that I just did something.
That's really useful advice. I was just going to pass over to Nicole now. You have a question?
Yeah, thank you for the discussion so far. My question connects to the ideas of interdisciplinarity and trying to, you know, do something with your sociology degree. And you spoke to, you know, Bruno Latour's idea of actor network theory and the field of new materialisms that work with, you know, non-human or more than human actors. But I know like a big critique of that field of theory is that it often disavows its politicization, or the innate politics involved with the non-human and doing work with the non-human and that sort of stuff. So in like your work connected to stem cell research and which could be considered a non-human. Yeah, how do you negotiate that whole kind of political minefield in both the theoretical understanding of the work you're doing and in the way that you do the work?
No, that's a good question. I guess the way that I've kind of come full circle in my theoretical approach, so most of my theoretical background was in kind of existential phenomenology. A lot of my training was in that, which I found very frustrating because it doesn't acknowledge the political. So and then post PhD on that, I was very driven to more the these post-structuralist kind of ways of understanding new materialism. I want to figure these new ways of understanding how the world works, but again, politics is not very well understood. So I've kind of come full circle in some respects. I've kind of gone back to more of a practice theory orientation of the world. And one of the reasons why I really like practice theory is it's kind of like, I'd call it like a total system. We have the human actor within a particular ecosystem, I guess if we use the chemist understanding of it. So I'm very interested in how people exist within a system and how the interrelationships between power and other things come about. So what's kind of drawn me, I guess, back to practice theory is it's about human action, practice, what people do, but it's also about these other things, about how they influence human behavior and how we do things. So if we understand practice theory, that chemist stuff, there's particular practice architectures. So these are kind of, I guess, structured ways or ways of undertaking or taken for granted ways of practice that we are shared with others, I guess. So there's a collection of practices that allow us to do certain things that we share with others. So it's understanding that group dynamic with the individual. So what I've also been thinking about is how we can have, I guess, certain kind of externalities within the system, things like COVID and others, how they can disrupt our understanding of human society relations to reconfigure relationships in different ways. So one thing I like about practice theory and that is how it kind of morphs and changes depending on particular contexts. It's a very fluid, dynamic way of understanding the world. And I guess what's interesting about this is when you talk about this in a very non-theoretical way to policymakers, and that is they all thoroughly agree with you. Oh, wow, yes, that's very interesting. Yes, so we definitely agree. So that's, I guess, an interesting insight, right? I think there's something about practice theory that people can really relate to when you really drill it down to that most basic level. Because for me, I think practice theory, I don't know, I think it can do things that a lot of theory can't, because what I'm worried about with a lot of existing social theory is most people use it incorrectly. Foucault is very misused all the time. People misinterpret what he says about being a toolbox you can pick and mix. Well, no, you need to understand within the context of his theoretical approach. So I think it's using this, in a more coherent way together. I think it's quite important. I don't want to say bad things about postmodernism because I do like postmodernism, but I think we have to understand the traditions to get where we are today. You got to understand how one morphs into the other, so we don't end up with arbitrary, understandings of things. Because I almost feel like structuralism is going to make a comeback in some way. Some guy's going to have a new theory, and we're going to end up with structural theory again, and we all, nobody wants that. It's a bit of a political statement. Sorry to my French colleagues. In France, there's actually structuralists that still exists, which is very disappointing, but that's how it is.
On a slightly different tangent, we've got a question on the chat, which is asking about, you talked about networking and the importance of networking with others throughout your talk, but do you have any advice on how to get started with this? Especially when you're just starting out.
I've got great experience with this. When I came to New Zealand for the second time, I didn't really have much of a network. And the best thing to do is ring them up on the phone or send them emails saying, hey, do you want to go for a coffee and talk about this? That's all you can do. And I know it's quite difficult, but I don't get embarrassed by things like that because, all they can do is say no. What's scary about a no? So, if they say no, it means you don't want to really talk to them anyway. but most people you'll find are very generous with their time. So I would talk to anyone, go out of your way and just say, hey, look, do you want to have a coffee? Something non-committal, like something like coffee is really good. It's a third space because it could be, you know, not at their house, it's somewhere safe, somewhere public. Something like that I think is the best thing to do. So just find people and just ask them, you know. And unfortunately there's no easy way to do stakeholder engagement. You just gotta just ask people. What you find is most people really respond to it, even the scary ones. Most people are very open to having a coffee. It's very non-committal, so I would just encourage people to just get out there and try it, you know. Part of it, as I said, is about having confidence, but it's also self-compassion. You know, if someone says no, it's not a reflection of you. It's just obviously they're too busy or something else. But keep on trying. Just really, you know, just make that effort. Because what's also, again, is the follow-up. So when you do have a discussion, is making sure you follow that up with either another discussion or at least an email. So, hey, look, I really valued something about our discussion. You know, and follow them up for that, you know, but also using techniques on them that we often use in qualitative interviews, right? So if you're asking someone for advice or want to do things, say, hey, look, can you recommend someone else or something else, you know, someone else I should talk to, or do you think I should talk to? And there from that, you can snowball into other people. So it's kind of using sociology techniques. So I like to call it the dark arts. You're using sociology techniques against others for your ends. But I'll just go out there and do it. I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes it is. And I think that's the beauty of being a Kiwi sometimes when you're overseas, right? Is you don't have that same fixation on, oh, that person's a famous professor. It's just great to go up and say, hey, I'm Casimir, how are you? and that's just how you got to do it, right? I've done that numerous times for many, you know, people just at a conference, or if I know I'm going to London or something, I'll email someone, say, hey, look, I really want to talk to you about this, or you know, going to another country. So I think it's just having a go and seeing where you go. And that goes for all levels, you know, whether you're talking academics, whether you're talking government people. Because with government people, I guess the hardest thing is identifying the right person. But that's why you need the networks to find out who the right person is. But using your personal network, using colleagues at work, anyone to kind of find out who the right people are, and just kind of ring them up or email and say, hey, look, do you want to meet? Have a quick chat. But I guess the key thing I guess I would do when doing that, and this is I guess where the advice bit comes in, is just kind of being clear about what you want out of them. Don't make it a mystery. You know, just be kind of straight up. Oh, look, I'm very interested to get your advice on this issue. You know, I'm very interested to hear what you have to say on this. Because I think if you leave it ambiguous or you leave it as a mystery, they might be wondering and they might not want to talk to you because they might think you have some kind of agenda or something. Or I'll just be straight on and say, hey, look, I'm very interested in working for your company, or I want to talk about this. Do you have, you know, 30 minutes? Go for a coffee and talk about it. You know, that's what I would do. Not having an agenda, I think, or being very open, I think is very clear. And I think that's something that I'm always quite open about, is making sure I don't have an agenda when I'm meeting people. I'm very clear when I'm talking to them what I want out of them or what I want to discuss. So the kind of no surprises approach, I guess. Because what you don't want is to surprise or pounce something on people that they feel awkward about or something. But if you're telling someone, hey, I want to talk about job opportunities or something, they know from the get-go that's your goal, and therefore they can prepare for it. So yeah.
Very good advice. Caleb, did you have a question?
I do, and also wanted to raise the hand thing because I've never actually done that on a Zoom call. It took me a while to find it, so I'm quite proud of myself. That's my achievement for the week. Hey, Casimir, thanks for that. Really interesting stuff. I was quite curious about what you just said about what's so scary about a no. In my very early days as a sociology student, I got a no from someone that I looked up to, and it was soul destroying. It really knocked me. But what got me back was the yeses after that, and the yeses came through SAANZ. So I kind of want to ask you about the formal networks compared to the informal. So you're talking about reaching out to people by email, asking for coffee, that sort of thing. That's kind of like the informal personal stuff, whereas things like SAANZ, which kind of fosters the networking, introduces you to other students, etc., and people who there's no doubt they're willing to talk to you, that's more of the formal. So do you have any advice for people about that balance?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think I'm probably a different person, probably not the person to ask on this, because what I like to do is I also like to create formal opportunities for engagement. So a couple of times what I've done is once I was very interested in, as a group, we did this project, we were very interested in talking to these scholars. So what we did is we organized a symposium. So what we did is we invited all these scholars to come to Italy for this symposium. We just picked people that were reading that we really wanted to engage with. We knew absolutely none of them for a bar of soap and just invited them to come to this event. And they all came, and it was quite interesting. So what I do is like to create opportunities where that formal networking can take place for others. So I've done that a few times. On your first day of work, we had a symposium of policymakers and academics around STS that I'd organised. But for me, I think, Callum, this is probably more peculiar to me as an individual, as I always do the personal approach. It's something that I just do. I don't care who the person is. And as you say, sometimes it can be, you can get burned, but I kind of just don't let that bother me. I've had a few people I've looked up to too, be a bit weird or something, very quite negative or rude to you, but I just kind of, you just move on with it. And I know that probably is not for everyone. So it's about building resiliency. I'm quite fortunate. I've had a lot of bad luck in my life. So I'm bulletproof, man. It's pretty hard to get through my skin. But that's through, just through disappointment. You get that when you grow up in New Zealand. But just give it a go. As I said, people can only say no. Naivety, I think, is a great thing. Use it to your advantage as a silly Kiwi asking questions. Ora and I recently did this as well, didn't we, Ora? We were scoping out a project called The Future of Work. So what we did is we were just trying to figure out what to do, and we identified two leading scholars in the area, Linda Clark and another one. And what we did, we just sent her an email, didn't we, and say, hey, look, we really like your work, we like your thoughts in our research project. So we just organised like a Zoom meeting with her. So I don't know, just try what you can. But I guess it's keeping in mind, as Callum said, that people can be rude, people can say no. So you just got to, as I said before, practice self-compassion. Just be, aware that negativity can happen, but just try and, just keep it real. But just try. For me, I guess one of my challenges is trying to, create opportunities for others as well. That's something I feel like very driven to do at this point in my career. That's why I'm very interested in like your groups and what you guys are doing, because I didn't really have the benefit of things like this. So I'm very interested in creating opportunities. So this is one of the reasons why I signed Brains Up for that internship scheme at Vic Uni. And I'm very interested in doing these things. So I'm very interested in assisting other New Zealanders build some infrastructure to support people like yourselves, because I think as a community in New Zealand, we need these things. And I don't think we should leave it up to, just Hail Mary type things like this is how we go. I think, as Callum said, some formal ways of doing this would be invaluable. So I think what you guys are doing is a classic, great thing to do. And I've said before, more than happy to use experience that I've learned on how to do that. Because one of the, I think some of the things I've learned is definitely around how to create things and how to enable that to happen. Because the biggest things you kind of have, I guess, is trying to drag people in that same direction. And I think you can do that through supporting others, but showing that vision and trying to just, as I said before, being a person and just helping others with that, because I think that's really important. If we help each other, good people make good sociologists. So if we're all nice to each other and support each other, we'll have a nice kind of community that we can support each other. Because for me, that I want to be, I don't want to be remembered for, some sensational articles and a few other things. I'd prefer to be remembered as a good person Like that's what for me is my legacy that I hope to leave. I just want to be, yep, Casimir, he was a great bloke. So for me, that's the accolades that I'm chasing. I want people to think I'm a nice person. So I think just think about that. So that's what we try to do.
And on that note, I guess is a good time to wrap up for today. Thank you, Casimir, and everyone for coming along. I'll just do a little SAANZ membership plug as well, whilst I have you all here. But student membership is only $10 a year, and this gives you access to fortnightly newsletters, letting you know about upcoming events across New Zealand, emerging research, as well as other opportunities, competitions, and scholarships. And we have a little link in the chat to go to there to find out more information or to sign up. Yeah, next month we'll have Kaylin Lipsey and David Allison from the Value Graphics Project come to speak. So that's on Wednesday, the 1st of June, same time and same place. And if you got something out of the session, please do feel free to share it amongst your little networks. And yeah, thank you, Casimir. If everyone can join with me in thanking him, that'd be great.
Well, thank you guys. If anyone's got any other questions that they want to answer, just email me or reach out on social media. I'm happy to help. I'll help mostly everyone except Lauren. No.
Me still by now, it's fine. He's sick of me.
Yeah. No, I just think well done, guys. I think it's a great initiative, and I think it's real credit to SAANZ, and I think it's a great thing to have to support others thinking about careers in sociology. As I said, it's definitely a valid career choice, and I think the more we understand that and show that, it's a great thing to do.
Thank you.